Well, good evening. How's everyone doing? Awesome. Well, welcome to the Corning Museum of Glass Hot Glass Show. And you guys have picked a fantastic demonstration to come to. So first of all, it's 6 p.m. This is our late show here at the Corning Museum of Glass. And this is a time when we like to do something a little bit more special, a little bit more involved, a more elaborate project. And today is made even more fantastic by our awesome visiting artists. And so the first lady that I'd love to introduce you to is our artist this evening, and she's standing right over here, closest to me, but this is Mel Douglas. Let's have a great big round of applause. Welcome Mel up here. And so she has come quite a long way to visit us here in Corning, New York. She's from Canberra, Australia, and so she's from down under. Yeah, any Aussies out there? Just me and Mel then. My mom's Australian, so I'm happy to have another Aussie here. But she's here teaching a class in our studio. So across the street, we have a teaching facility. And she's been working there with a group of students and teaching a class. But we've got a great big team here tonight, and so there's many other people I'd like to introduce you to. And so another gaffer, or glassblower, who's going to be helping Mel to realize her design tonight is Nancy Callan. So that's Nancy standing right there at the reheating furnace. So welcome, Nancy. We also have Dane Jack right here from Corning, New York. You can just keep this going. We've got Eric Meek from Corning, New York at the furnace. We have Corey Pemberton over there, also TAing or helping Nancy teach. We have Alex Cannon at the far reheating furnace. Excited to see her. And of course, another hometown fellow, George Kennard, right here from Corning, part of the Hot Glass Show team at the museum. So awesome team tonight. Yeah, thank you. So my name is Megan Matthey. I'll be explaining things. So I've got the awesome job of chit-chatting with you, answering questions, and so you can definitely let me know if there's things that you are curious about. But it's going to be a pretty involved process tonight. You can see we've got so much activity happening here on our shop floor. The way that Mel works, she is known for her cold working. So this is a style of working the glass. After it's been blown and inflated, she takes it into the cold shop where she engraves and etches into the surface of that glass. And so that's where her craftsmanship comes along. But her process is to work with gaffers, to work with this team of glass blowers. She is kind of like the foreman on her construction site, the conductor of the orchestra. She has come up with all the designs and is making the decisions here about how she wants the piece to look. And this entire team is here to help her realize that. And so we've got an illustration of the work that we are putting together tonight. It's actually on a little magnet board next to our melting furnace. You can see it under the Corning Museum of Glass logo. And it's this beautiful black form, and it's going to look like a great big bowl tonight, but there's going to be so much more going on, because between the layers of glass on this bowl, we're going to have wraps of threads of colored glass. And so there's going to be many layers, many kind of veils to this piece of glass, and that's all texture that Mel is going to be able to reveal as she cold works or engraves into the glass. So it's going to be a beautiful piece of glass, an extremely elegant one. And you can see another example of her work, actually, if you head up the steps into our contemporary glass gallery. We actually have her work here in our permanent collection. So that's on display if you want to take a look at one of these pieces finished, if you want to see that texture that she's created. But on our two benches, we've got the two different teams going. And so with the glass that Nancy has here, you can see she's got a clear bubble. She's setting it up on the center table. This is called a marver. This is going to be what we call she's going to be making a cup, basically. The glass that George has on the other bench, we're going to stuff it inside this cup. So you're going to see these two pieces of glass become one a little bit later on, and it's how we're going to create all of these layers in our finished work. Right now, we are threading on a stripe of colored glass. And so Alex, she got a chunk of concentrated glass color, encased it in clear, got it nice and hot. Yeah, you can clap for that. Beautiful thread wrap. And we're going to do that several times. And so building all of these little threads up in layers. All right, now did you see how some of those just kind of broke away? She doesn't want those on what we call the moil of our glass, the glass that's still attached to the pipe. We're scraping them off of that section and then just fusing it below this line here in the bubble of our glass. Now, the glass that we're working with here is called soda lime glass, and it's really the most common formula of glass in the world. Does anyone know the main ingredient in glass? I heard it's sand. Yeah, so we don't go to the beach, though, and shovel up our sand and load it into the melting furnace. The silica that we use is mined out of a mountain, and so it specifically comes from Lane Mountain out in Washington State. But if we tried to just melt pure silica, it would need an extremely high melting temperature, around 4,000 degrees. Now, can you feel the heat from any of these furnaces when we open up the door? Yeah, they're only 2,000 degrees. We do not want a 4,000 degree furnace. And so in order to lower the melting temperature of silica, it needs a flux. So they add soda ash to it. Now, that actually makes the glass soluble. So then to stabilize it, they add lime. So when we call it soda lime glass, not a very creative name, but you get the idea. Those are our three main ingredients here. Now, she's working with beautiful black glass. And so to create colors in glass, what they're going to do is take that formula of clear and add different metal oxides to change the color. So we've got a lot of colorful glass up here. My favorite color is pink. Does anybody love pink glass like I do? Oh, we've got expensive taste. You need to add gold chloride to make the glass pink, and so it actually follows the price of gold. We've got some beautiful green glass over here on this fish. Who loves green glass? Oh, cheap taste. You need to add iron oxide to make the glass green. So a little bit of rust would actually change the color of all that glass. But manganese can create purple glass. Cobalt can create a beautiful deep blue glass. Tin and titanium can create white glass. And with the black that she's using, that she's working with today, there is no true black glass. It's actually very densely concentrated deep blue or purple. So there is probably quite a bit of cobalt oxide and manganese to create that nice dark color. All right, so George has just taken another gather of glass from a melting furnace. Did you guys see the liquid glass just drip right off the end of his steel? Call that a strip gather. We can actually play you an animation on our screen here of what happens when we gather glass out of the melting furnace. So if our AV team is pretty busy, but inside the furnace, it's a great big 1,000-pound pot of liquid glass. If you imagine having a bowl of room temperature table honey, dipping a chopstick into that bowl and twirling it, trying to wind out as much honey as you can, it's very similar to the move that we go through when we're collecting glass. So there you go. You can see how you just wind it up out of that furnace. And people often wonder, what are the limitations to the scale of an object you can make? Well, here in this studio, we have very few limitations. We've got an amazing amount of space to work with. We have these great big melting furnaces, reheating furnaces, and we got a lot of muscle power here, a lot of manpower to help lift it. But we're going to see quite a few of these gathers come together, quite a few of these thick layers of glass come into this single piece. And so it looks like Alex over there on the far side, she's still got a chunk of colored glass that she's shaping. Eric has a white chunk of glass. So we're going to be layering white and black together today, by the looks of things. This table right here in the middle, this is called our marver, M-A-R-V-E-R. It's a great big steel slab. And this little piece of equipment here, it's a machine wrap, and so it's got these two sets of wheels. They're set at an angle a little bit. Eric was just checking that out. As you roll your pipe in these sets of wheels, it scoots the entire bubble backward a little bit. And so that's how they're able to get those very perfect, evenly spaced stripes on the glass. And so again, just checking the angle there. Tapping on that with the paddle to make sure that it's going to move the appropriate amount. Now, the temperature relationships to make this happen are really important. This bubble of glass that Nancy has on the end of her pipe, she doesn't want it to be moving a lot. As they spin that very quickly, if it's a little bit off-center, it will be pulled with centrifugal force more and more off-center. So picture a tether ball, right, on a pole, whipping around there. Whereas if you have it perfectly centered off the end, it'll stay in place nicely. And so she needs to have a good amount of stability, a good amount of She just doesn't want to see that being influenced by gravity too much. But she does want the surface to be sticky enough, because we want it to make a good bond with the thread of glass that we're about to present. So here we go. If you missed it the first time, we get to see it happen again. Alex presenting that little bit, sticks it down. And so Alex helps determine the weight of that line just by how far she pulled her glass back and away. And by having Corey and Nancy work together, nicely done. Having both Corey and Nancy work together to turn that pipe ensured that there was never any break in that rotation, that they were able to make that absolutely flawless. They did a beautiful, beautiful job there. And so this is a pretty common style to work. There's not a lot of people in the world who can blow glass and have this title of gaffer. And Mel, she's an example of an artist who doesn't blow glass, but she makes glass artwork. And so she gets to create design. She often starts at the drawing board, and she does drawings and printmaking of the glass that she wants to create, and then works with a team of artists just like this to help realize that. Then she takes that work into the cold shop. She does all the engraving and line working after the piece is completely cooled off. Now, are there any questions out there tonight? You can always just get my attention. I'll try and come up close where I can hear you. What? If you want to buy it, you're going to have to talk to Mel about that. So yeah, for the most part, when we make glass during our demonstrations here at the museum, they don't get sold in our gift shop. We're not here to retail glass. We're here to educate you. We're here to entertain you. So most of the work that gets made here at the museum throughout the day gets given away during different raffles during our shows. It gets given to different charitable causes, to different promotional events, but we don't retail it. But that's pretty fantastic for the team of art makers, because then, there's nobody dictating what it is that we create. We get to, come in and take risks. We get to make artwork and not necessarily take orders or fill what we think will jump off the shelves in a retail operation. What's your question? How many times do we have something that doesn't turn out? Oh, never, never, ever, right? So, we do have a really awesome team up here, but one of the realities of glass making is that it is precarious. Glass is fragile, glass is breakable, and it doesn't go right all the time. So, periodically during the shows here, things will break, things will hit the floor. Sometimes as things are cooling down, there's potential that they could crack, something could go wrong. And so, it's never over till it's over, until she's completely finished with this work, until she's done all of the engraving and cutting and seen that come together. That's, I think, the point that we can all have a big sigh of relief. At this stage, you're looking at a room full of amazing talent. The mistakes aren't going to happen, but, there's still just a built-in margin of error that you have to have when you make glass. Now, if you are learning to blow glass, I think you need to be prepared to have a really, really low success rate. So the first few years that I was blowing glass, I made what is called the mom glass collection, right? It's glass that only your mom will love and collect and continue to display. And so it's definitely something that you have to do because you love. You're going to make ugly things for a really long time before you get over those hurdles, before you have the right amount of skill, before you have the right amount of understanding of the material. And the people who are going to stick with that to reach a professional level are only going to do it because they love it. I had a teacher who told me when I was first getting started that it would take me about 3 years to learn how bad I was at blowing glass. And he would say that to all of his students, not just to me. But I think that's a pretty true statement. After about 3 years of study, you might have a really good understanding of the material. You might have your own ideas about what type of glass art you want to make. And around that time, you're going to really grasp how far you've yet to go. Glass blowing is a lifelong learning process. But I think that's something that drives a lot of us. Every day that's spent in the studio is a day that you learn something. So it looks like we're getting ready to do another thread wrap. Now, something pretty interesting is happening in the middle here where she's cooling off her blowpipe. The pipes that we work with, they are made of stainless steel. And if you are curious about steel, it's stainless steel 309. And it's a really poor conductor of heat. So believe it or not, everybody in this room does have all of their nerve endings intact. We do still feel pain. And the metal just doesn't hurt us. If you look at all of the blowpipes that we're working with, there's a tarnished area and a shiny area. Now that's a really good indicator of where you can touch and where you can't, right? Where the pipe is still shiny, it's comfortable to hold, no worse than holding onto the handle of a coffee cup. But the tarnished area, we call that the hospital zone. And you might grab the hospital zone once, and then you will never, ever do it again. It's a really effective teacher. And so we like to make sure that we introduce this piece of glass to the heat in between each of these wraps. You see the texture that comes on when we add that thread of glass? Well, we don't want that to influence the next wrap. We want that to go on a smooth surface, and so just building it up in layers. But for those of you just joining us here in the amphitheater and those of you joining us on the live stream, we've got an amazing team in the house tonight. We have our guest artist, Mel Douglas from Canberra, Australia, as our artist and designer for this piece of glass. We also have Nancy Callan, one of the gaffers, who's helping her to realize this design. And they're both here because they are teaching at our studio across the street. The studio at the Corning Museum of Glass is a fantastic teaching facility. We bring instructors and artists from all over the world to teach and take classes, to collaborate together. And the summer is a really fun time to be in Corning because we get this amazing community of artists. And so you can have a taste of the experience, or you can really dive in. And here we go, another one of those amazing machine wraps. Beautifully done. So. All right, now we've got Team George and Dane now with their section of our glass. And Eric Meek is about to present the thread. We could kind of count this as a competition right now and see if they do as good a job. So here we go. Instead of wrapping black glass around a clear bubble, we are wrapping a thread of white glass around a black bubble. And it looks like they are doing an equally fantastic job here. Beautiful. Then strip that away. Nicely done. So I don't know if you caught that, but to actually break the thread free from the bubble, Mel just gave it a little flick, right? I think it's a pretty impressive move there. Anytime you flick that glass to break it. When it's very thin, it's cold to the touch almost instantly, but her finger is just a wisp away from that bubble, which was well over 1,000 degrees. So I think she gets style points for that. Yeah. All right, so here we go. Next wrap. So you can see that little bit of a wiggle in the piece there, but they've got it under control. And centrifugal force is a major player when you're working with hot glass. So just the speed and the rotation, like a tether ball whipping around a pole. Now I hear the debate happening out here of centripetal or centrifugal force going on. Let me know if you reach an answer. Centripetal. All right, so we have some info out here saying that according to some of the physicists who are also glass blowers, I would argue that all glass blowers are physicists to some extent, applied physics, but centripetal force, not centrifugal. But for those of you who aren't into physics, let me explain it the way that I love to explain it. So my favorite skirt is my spin-around skirt. When I twirl in a circle, it flares out all around me. Well, that force is the force that we're talking about. When this glass is very hot, it can move like fabric. It can flow, it can drape. And the faster you turn it, it just pulls outward. So you can... A skilled gaffer or glass blower can do a lot of shaping, without using any tools. They can accomplish a lot of shaping by using heat, by using gravity, by using centripetal force. Back to that pipe cooler. Just a nice trough of water cooling off the handle of the steel here. I think he gets more style points for that as well. All right, another one of these wraps. Here we go. Turn, turn, turn. So the communication between Eric, George, and Dane is really important when they go to do this step. And we have another one of those just flawless, evenly distributed threads of glass. Flick, there we go. Now, it's important I note that the different colors that we're working with, we've got clear glass, white glass, and black glass, they all behave a little bit differently. They all react differently to the heat. Yeah, the question is, does Mel strictly design her pieces, or does she also blow glass? She strictly designs them and cold works them. So all of the texture and mark making on the surface, that's going to be her own craftsmanship. But she is not a gaffer or a glass blower. And that's pretty common. There's not a lot of people in the world who can blow glass, especially at the scale and the complexity that we're bringing to these pieces. And so there are a lot of glass artists who will, work with a team of gaffers, have them execute the piece and what they need to see made. And sometimes that is the finished work, but it's still the artist who designed it. That is their art. But in this case, she also brings her own craft in the form of cold working. Good questions. But what they want to do right now is start to constrict a section of that glass down between the bubble and the pipe. And so introducing all of that heat close to the blowpipe is going to help soften the glass right in that section. As they reheat the glass in the furnace, the first end to go in and the last end to go out, the very tip of that bubble, that wants to be hotter than everything else. And so you can kind of work against that by using the torch at the bench. All right, so if we can take a look at Nancy's bench over here, she's squeezing in that constriction line. She's using a tool called jacks to do that. So it's nice long steel blades. Those are the jacks. And she's cinching that down. Now, I am a glass expert, but I'm also a chocolate expert. Are there any chocolate experts in the crowd? Quite a few of you. Excellent. So if you are a chocolate expert, you know about the lines in your chocolate bar. They help you snap it apart. Some people share or practice portion control. I just find it really satisfying to snap those pieces of chocolate apart in straight lines. Well, this line that we cinch and score into the glass, that's like your line on your chocolate bar. The more nicely defined it is, the easier time you're going to have when you want to break that glass with a lot of precision. If you've ever broken glass at home, you know it likes to break pretty erratically, right? Kind of breaks on a curve. And so we have to take very careful measures to break the glass right where we need it to go. Feels like a little bit of drag as you're turning. It's funny, sometimes you can watch a gaffer and they might be standing at the furnace reheating a piece of glass, not even looking at it. They might be having a conversation with someone to their right or left, but they can feel if that glass were to fall off center at all. All right, now really starting to change the shape of our bubble. And this big table, it's called a marver, M-A-R-V-E-R. And the verb that we assign to this action is marvering the glass. And so it both cools and shapes the glass. And it might look like she's just resting that glass and rolling it back and forth, but she's actually supporting a lot of that weight in her hands and arms. It's more like you want to skim the surface of that table as you move your glass back and forth. And it's a real treat to get to watch Nancy work. She is a world-class gaffer. And when I was learning how to blow glass, I really struggled with marvering. Let me just back this up and tell you what it feels like when you are nowhere near that skill level. That when I first started marvering, because you don't want to rest your glass on that table too much or you'll create a flat spot. You really want to have continuous movement. Well, to change directions is really tricky, to just go from rolling in one direction to rolling in the other without creating any flat spots. I really struggled with this. And so my awesome solution was that as I marvered, I would roll all the way across the table, lift up, scoot back, set it down again, and then roll again. And so it was like a typewriter, just rolling in one direction. And so it was a great accomplishment for me when I reached the point in my skills when I could marver both ways. But you see these very elegant, very graceful movements of our team up here, and I think they make it look deceptively easy. Now these jacks that she's using again, she was kind of reinforcing that little neckline or that constriction between the bubble and the pipe. But that's an extremely versatile tool. If you were watching someone blow glass or helping someone blow glass and you wanted to play a mean prank on them, you could take away all of their other tools and just leave them with a pair of jacks. And they could probably still make a really nice piece of glass. There's so many different ways we can use this. George, can I borrow these jacks? Yeah. All right, so this is what we're talking about. We've got these long steel blades here. And she squeezed these together to create the constriction. All right, we're about to see some change happening. We're going to be transferring this bubble onto a punty. So that's what Alex has made. This is Alex Callan, one of our visiting artists and helpers tonight. She has a solid steel rod with that little bit of glass on the tip. They stuck that right on the bottom of the bubble. Now this is a precarious connection point. It has to stick and hold for as long as it takes to finish the piece. But ultimately, it's designed to be temporary. So we don't want it to stick too well. We don't want it to truly fuse there. Now to free the bubble from the blowpipe, we're going to go back to that construction line. So again, think about the lines in your chocolate bar. Go back to that score mark. And to further help us crack the glass with precision, we use thermal shock. So thermal shock that you are familiar with is if you've ever poured room temperature soda over ice cubes and seen how they'll crack apart from that sudden temperature change. Well, here we drip water right on that line. Little tap, perfect break. The crowd goes wild. And that is a very, very worthy time to celebrate because a lot of things can go wrong. If that punty had been too cold, when they tapped the blowpipe and it broke free from the pipe, the piece of glass could have also let go from the punty connection. I've seen that happen more times than I could even count. If the bubble had been too cold, instead of that crack being perfect around the small circumference at the top, the crack could have traveled down into our bubble and we'd have a really sad design change. So anytime you see a successful punty transfer, it's worthy of celebration. And where the glass cracked free from the pipe, we would describe that as cold glass because in order for the glass to break and fracture like that, it can't be moving, so very hard. So if a glass blower tells you something is cold, let's double check. Cold for us, it's about maybe 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, so where that glass was a little bit thick, where it came away from the pipe, she's addressing that. She's tweezing it. She's starting to pinch at it, pull it, thin it out. But it left a pretty fancy little flowery design at the very top. Does anyone love that little flower shape at the top of the bubble? Yeah, Nancy doesn't, Mel doesn't. So they're actually going to be trimming that away. That's, to us, just looks like unfinished tool marks. And so she made another one of those constriction lines, and she can actually snip right through it. And that's just a little scrap. Some glass blowers would try and save it, maybe turn that into a magnet, but it's just scrap glass. If it's perfectly clear, we can remelt it. We can put that in our scrap bin of clear glass. It can get remelted inside our furnace. If it has any color in it, we don't want to recycle it ourselves. Otherwise, we wouldn't have clear glass to work with. All those colorful scraps would swirl together and make brown glass. But it does get recycled, just not by us. So same with all of your beer and wine bottles, all the different recycled glass from the museum. It'll go to a recycling plant. And often that glass will become an aggregate in asphalt or concrete. So if you're following along on our live stream tonight, we have our guest artist here, Mel Douglas. Mel is from Canberra, Australia, and she's here visiting the studio at the Corning Museum of Glass. She's teaching classes, and we're very lucky to have her here tonight in the amphitheater doing a demo for all of our visitors. She's got an awesome team of gaffers helping her out. One of her gaffers is Nancy Callan, who's here from Seattle. Also, Alex Cannon from Seattle. And they are also helping to teach classes over at the studio. We have our team right here from Corning. We've got George Kennard, Dane Jack, Eric Meek. And we also have Corey Pemberton from Penland, North Carolina. And so if you look at the design that Mel created, we've got this illustration that's on the white sheet of paper next to the melting furnace. She's got these series of lines that are kind of cross-hatching, and one is at an angle. And so the bubble that Nancy is working with here, we want to offset it. You know, right now, the stripes, they're going perpendicular to the bubble. They're kind of running at that nice right angle. But now we're making a hole, making an opening that's offset. And so I'm going to do quite a bit of work here to kind of change the axis of our bubble. And so that way, when we stuff George's bubble down inside this cup, it's going to create a cross-hatching effect with all the stripes that we've created. So they're making a hole in the glass. So this time the torch we're using, it's powered by natural gas and oxygen, and get that really bright flame, or really hot flame, with a lot of precision, so they can really carefully, selectively heat one section of glass. And she's picking at it with a pair of tweezers. They're actually broken through now. But she took those great big pair of tweezers, she'd squeeze them together, poke the bubble, and then release. So kind of pinching it apart little bit by little bit. And so now we have a hole. So Corey helped make a collar on the end of this blowpipe. So we have a blowpipe. We gathered a little glass on the tip and made sure there was a hole at the very opening. There we go. Nicely done. So we've transferred it off of that puntee onto our collar. We can continue to get this nice and round again, and now we're going to have these offset stripes. Now, it left a little bit of a scar. We call that a puntee mark, where the puntee broke free from the tip of that bubble. And if you look at almost all of the pieces of glass up here, on the bottom of each of them, there's evidence of that puntee. You know, that sometimes it leaves some glass behind, sometimes it takes some glass away. I think of it as a belly button. It's kind of similar, but it's a bit of an origin story. You can tell glass is handmade when you see a puntee mark. But in this case, we want to completely erase that. We can fire polish it, round it out again. So they're pinching off that little bit of additive glass. Now, as Nancy was trimming that, I don't know if you caught it, but Alex actually reached her hand around and just, you know, Nancy was using the shears, and Alex covered up Nancy's hand with her own hand. You know, when you're trimming glass, your hand is so close to that very, very hot object. And so when you're you know, in that moment, you know, you definitely want to concentrate on your glass. You want to be able to cut with a lot of care and precision. And you know, your nerve endings are kind of screaming at you. They're sending all the warning signals. They're telling you that they're very hot. And so to have an assistant come in and just deflect some of that heat is really helpful. Often before a glass blower goes to trim something, you might notice they'll dip their entire hand in a bucket of water before they pick up the shears, just to buy themselves a few extra minutes of comfort and protection. What's your question? will the piece of glass be out tomorrow? We'll probably end up cooling this piece down for about 24 hours, so it probably won't come out of the oven until late tomorrow or after the end of demos for the day. And then at that point, it goes over to Mel because she is going to be doing all of that cold working. She's going to be engraving the surface of this piece of glass. She will hand sand it. So from what she was saying, there could be about another 90 to 100 hours of work that goes on to make this piece happen. And she'll probably be doing that at the studio. So right across the street, we do have a studio facility where she can do that cold working. But this is an object that hopefully when it's done, when it's realized, will be shared on social media. So on our museum's Facebook page. And so another factor that Corey's working with here as he reheats the glass, and one that we can see a little bit, is the kind of the difference or the intensity of the glow where the glass is black versus where it's clear. And I talked a little bit earlier about how our different colors have different melting temperatures. And that black glass wants to be a little bit softer than the clear glass. And now that we have lost that radial symmetry, now that we've offset the stripes, it makes it a little bit more difficult to turn and keep centered. So when you have soft colors more concentrated off to one side of your bubble and you're turning it, it makes me think a little bit of trying to drive with a flat tire. It just kind of feels a bit off. That weight doesn't feel as evenly distributed. And so it's just definitely something you can work against and keep under control, but it takes a lot of skill to manage. Yeah, what's your question? Could you eat stuff out of the bowl like cereal? You could have like 12 boxes of cereal inside this single bowl. I think it's going to be that big. Of course, the intention for this piece of glass is not to be functional, but to be a work of art, and so more of a decorative piece. And another thing that is going to happen after the piece is cooled down is that it's going to be offset. So it's not going to be a bowl that sits perfectly level. The way that she shapes the bottom of it, it's going to sit at an angle. But, I think you could still enjoy a lot of ice cream or cereal out of it if you really wanted to. It's funny, I make a lot of glass, and, they often are very decorative pieces. If I am making something, wider than it is tall, like a bowl, no matter how fancy or decorative it is, I'm thinking about ice cream and eating ice cream out of it. It's kind of my heat therapy. If it's something that's taller than it is wide, like a nice vase, I think about a cold beverage I could enjoy out of that shape. So I think it's just kind of occupational therapy. Helps you deal with the heat. Now, speaking of other things that can make this really challenging, one thing we want to be careful of is not to accidentally touch this bubble against the doors of that reheating furnace. You guys see how they keep opening and shutting one of those barn doors on the front of the furnace? Well, hot glass wants to stick to other things that are hot. And so if they were to accidentally touch the piece of glass against the door, one of two terrible things would happen. They would either pull a chunk of that brick or that door out into their glass, or they would leave some of their glass behind stuck to the door. So either way, it would ruin the piece. And so you want to be pretty careful. You want to make sure that your assistants are doing a great job, that they anticipate when you're going to need to move your object inside or outside of that furnace. So it goes back to having great communication. All right, so I've heard Nancy make the request for a sculpture punty. So remember, punty, it's a solid steel rod, a little bit of glass on the tip. What that means is they're getting ready to transfer this bubble off of the blowpipe and take it onto a punty. So now we're going to go back to that cup with the opening on the very end, and then quite soon be stuffing the bubble that George and Dane have been managing inside our cup. So if you haven't been watching from the very beginning, what we have here is a clear bubble that had many black thread wraps wrapped around it. So very fine stripes of black color. And then we took that off of the blowpipe, we offset it, put it back on a pipe, getting ready to punty it again, but now we have these threads or these stripes of color that are offset. On the bubble that George and Dane have been managing, they did a black overlay, so we have a layer of black glass and then very fine white stripes wrapping all the way around that. When we stuff George and Dane's bubble inside of Nancy's cup, what we're going to end up with is a cross-hatching effect. Now, anytime we go to transfer the glass, we want to make sure that our temperature relationships are absolutely perfect. And so using that torch is helping Nancy to make sure that the top, the section that's still connected to the pipe, is at the right temperature. The tip of the bubble, not only does it have more color, dark color on it, and wants to absorb heat faster, it's also just the first end that goes into our reheating furnace, the last end that comes out. So it all on its own wants to be a little bit hotter. So watch as Alex shapes up this punty. She uses the marver table. As she rolls, she pushes forward a little bit. She kind of folds back the edge of glass along the pipe, or sorry, along the punty. It's a solid steel rod there. And then even shapes and rolls the very tip into a nice point. You know, touching it on that metal surface helps cool the glass and give it the right amount of stability. But it's still got to retain enough heat that it grabs on and holds. You know, this is a really heavy object, and so you don't want a weak connection by any means. So we got to see another way that Nancy used those jacks, kind of fine-tuning the punty connection. And the point of connection, it's only about the diameter of a nickel, right? So that's not much mass to hold all of that weight. So we're going to thermally shock the glass. And glass wants to break wherever the diameter is the smallest or the temperature is the coldest. And so while she waits for that punty connection to stabilize, she could make sure that the top shoulder of the bubble doesn't get too cold. A few drips of water. If you look really closely, you might actually see that glass kind of crizzle and crack. Perfect break. The crowd goes wild. Nicely done. All right. So our guest artist this evening is Mel Douglas from Canberra, Australia. And she is standing there right now helping to open and close the doors, but she is the designer of this piece of glass. She's visiting Corning and teaching at our studio. We have an amazing teaching facility. And she teaches a class all about cold working, or the engraving of glass. And so tonight we're seeing this team of about 7 or 8 people all working for a few hours here to bring this piece of glass together to make this beautiful form. After it's completely cooled, Mel is still going to spend about 12 hours hand sanding it to sand the surface of this object, and then another 70 or 80 hours engraving it. So the craftsmanship that she brings in her cold working is really astounding. If you want to see an example of her finished work here in person tonight, you can visit our gallery up at the top of the steps here. We've got one of her pieces in our permanent collection. All right, now we can see the glow of that glass. We can see they've reintroduced the heat where we broke it free from the pipe. And you might see a little bit of that asymmetry, a little wiggle in that glass, and that's just the black color reacting differently to the heat than the clear color. All right, and she is going to tweeze it. Just pull it gently. Thin out that clear glass. You might have noticed she didn't pull and trim the black glass, so just the clear section. And now this is a beautiful move to see Nancy trim that lip Nicely done, yeah. We've got, you see when the glass blowers start clapping that they're really happy with what they saw. When the glass is at the right consistency, it feels very soft and spongy, a bit like you're cutting through an orange peel. But as you make your way around that circumference, because the glass is just cooling down in the ambient temperature, and because the shears that you're holding onto are steel and they're sucking heat out of the glass, it's getting stiffer and stiffer. So you want to be swift when you cut the glass, and you want to make sure that you had plenty of heat to begin with. So Corey there, he just heated up the jacks that Nancy wants to use. So sometimes when you touch metal tools onto glass, they will cool it very quickly, and they can leave what we call chill marks, little marks behind in your glass. And so if we preheat them, lubricate them with beeswax, it's going to have a nicer time. Did you guys see that crazy wiggle that the glass did? Again, that's just the black color heating up faster than the clear glass. The dark color is absorbing more light, more heat. So they get softer a lot faster. All right, really starting to transform this into that nice cup shape. So she used the jacks inside the vessel. As she was turning, she lifted. She used them outside the vessel to contour and keep the walls of it very nice and straight. That's a great view where you can see those concentric circles or spirals of stripes from the inside of that bubble. So the lip wants to be a lot hotter than the very bottom of the bubble or the closed end of the bubble. So spending a moment addressing that with the torch is going to make sure that as they go to reheat this, that the top doesn't heat out of control and that the bottom doesn't get too cold. Now also pay attention to how slowly they're turning as they reheat that glass. Centrifugal force is a real beast to contend with right now. At this temperature, if she were to turn the iron very, very quickly, this glass would move just like a dancer's skirt. They could flare this with very little effort. So we want to make sure that the lip of this bowl is perpendicular to the body. And so you might have seen them run their wooden board just against the very lip or the very rim while holding the jacks, the steel blades, against the outside wall, just maintaining that nice angle. And especially when you have uneven color distribution, like this black against the clear, where the black wants to get much softer, that's always a moving target. Holding the wooden board as you're turning can help keep everything just visually perfect, keep it nice and straight. All right, now Nancy, she's been moving between these two benches here. She's talking with George. And so I think we're getting ready to see the next phase. So, our goal is still to stuff this bubble of glass down inside this cup. And when we do that, we're going to need to break the cup free from the punty and set it in probably a mold or a little nest. But we're starting to see them reintroduce the heat to this bubble of glass. When they stuff it down in the cup, we really kind of want it to flow and drip and completely fill that vessel. Otherwise, you could end up with air bubbles that get trapped. And so we really want this to be extremely soft, yet still under control when they bring the two pieces together. All right, so we're doing a little bit of a studio rearrange here. We've got a nice set of stairs. We've got a mold. So what we're going to do is be breaking this cup off of the punty. We're going to set it down into one of these molds down on the floor. And it's kind of think of an egg cup, right? I used to dip an egg. And this mold that they're going to set it in, it's made of cast aluminum. You can see Alex over there preheating it, because we want to make sure that the glass, when it touches this metal, if it touches room temperature metal, the metal could actually suck so much heat out of the glass that it would thermal shock and crack it. All right, so George is about to gather again. Watch this. He's gathering that glass out of the melting furnace. And we already had a really big bubble to begin with. That was a lot of surface area. And so he's going to come out with a pretty enormous amount of glass. And this is called a strip gather, where he lets some of that excess just drain or drip right off the end. So that glass is the consistency of honey at that stage. You can see it just flows. It's liquid. And we want the size of this bubble that George is holding to match the volume of the inside of that cup pretty closely. So they've taken great care up to this point to really pay attention to the dimensions of both of these objects. You know, they knew pretty closely how much mass you would end up with after this strip gather. And it's also important that we did this strip gather because now we have a very hot, soft surface of glass that's going to help fuse the George's bubble and Nancy's cup together to make this come together nicely. And so George, he went right over to the reheating furnace, because we do want this to be soft. You know, that fresh gather of glass, the heat is penetrating the layers underneath. It's going to help heat it up, going to help it all move and stretch and flow together. I'm going to do just a little bit of adjustment on the surface, just a little bit of finessing of that shape. You know, we really want to make sure we have symmetry, right? We don't want a mass of clear glass on one side and then a thinner layer of clear glass on the other. You know, we want that fresh gather of glass to be evenly distributed all the way around the circumference. All right. So I like this. Nancy's got style points for being on the Marver. All right, so they're going to hand this off to her. We've got the cup nicely broken into that mold. And here we go, moment of truth. We drip that down inside. And she blows too. And you can see those layers coming together. We don't want to trap any air in between. Beautiful, beautiful job. Nicely done. All right, so right away, George, he picks that up, takes that over to the reheating furnace. And I think everybody can have a great big sigh of relief when you see that go well. You know, sometimes if you had let that cup get a little bit too cold, if the cup were too cold and then you drip the extremely hot glass down inside of it, that can cause thermal shock. That could cause the cup to crack or fracture. But that is exactly the way we wanted to see it happen. And so now that there's kind of that lip of the cup that's kind of still sitting straight up, we're going to want to heat that and kind of fold it down a little bit. We want to block this in, which means we're going to smooth the entire surface, make sure there's no texture. And George is using the Marver to help do that, to help fold that down. And so each time George reheats this glass, when he goes back to Marver, do you see how the angle that he holds the pipe is changing? He holds that blowpipe at a lower angle, and that way he can fold the edge of the cup right up around the connection point with the steel. And so the shape that we often describe the shape of a nice bubble here is we want it to be a bit like a Q-tip or a cotton swab. Maybe this one would be suitable for a dragon, but you know, you still get the idea. You want that kind of nice round bubble and how it tapers and folds back nicely against the steel. So this week I've been really happy that I've gotten to watch Nancy as a gaffer, and she also wears a bandana over her face. I think style points for sure, but it's mostly functional. That's also another layer that's going to help deflect heat away from her skin when she's working on a really big object like this. So glass blowers sometimes encounter different style moves. There's something called a glass blower haircut, which a lot of us are familiar with. It's if your hair gets a little close to one of these torches, or I used to wear my hair in braids. I'd have these long braids, and I noticed that after a while, my right braid was considerably shorter than my left one, because that sometimes would fall over my shoulder and get singed and shortened close to the glass. These annealing ovens, these are the ovens we use to cool down our glass. They're 900 degrees inside, and so we'll place glass inside them when we're finished, and there's something called the annealer haircut, where suddenly you have bangs and no eyebrows. It's an interesting look. What's your question? Oh. If you do have questions, let me know. I can do my best to answer them. So as George is turning this glass, it's extremely heavy, and he wants that heat to be reintroduced all the way up to the point where it connects to the pipe. And so he's really going to be feeling the movement of the material. He's going to feel it wiggling. He's going to feel it falling with gravity. And so this takes so much strength and a lot of experience to understand the movement of the material. If you overheat it, if you get this too hot, it could drip out of control. It could fall on the ground. It could puddle. But if you don't get it hot enough, then you're not going to be able to get the shaping done that needs to take place. So earlier, we were using a newspaper pad, folded up wet newspaper, to shape the glass. We've now switched over to a steam pad, and these are graphite fibers that are soaked in water, but it still feels quite a bit like fabric, a soft, kind of flexible and pliable pad. That helped Nancy to really wrap her fingers around the tip of the bubble. We did quite a bit of inflating. Now the shape that we're working with, it's becoming a little bit more challenging because the rounded tip of it is already kind of deflected from the burners or the heat inside that reheating furnace. You might see that Mel has actually closed one of the doors in. They're trying to deflect some of that heat back close to the blowpipe. What's your question? Hey, no worries. Let me know if you think of one of those burning questions. You like that? See what I did there? So gravity helping out here. He's hanging it downhill. You saw it stretched a little bit. That's also helping to thin the glass close to the pipe. Pretty soon we're going to need to create a constriction line. So another one of those necks where we cinch down a score mark into the glass. And so we want to make sure that the glass is appropriately inflated, that it's a little bit thinner there, and also appropriately heated, that she can actually dive her tools in. Oh, now we can really start to see that beautiful pattern happening. So we have those cross-hatching lines. So thinking about the layers of glass here, we started with clear glass that was overlaid with a coat of black. So a solid layer of black glass that was wrapped with many threads or many spirals of white stripes. Then because we stuffed that into another cup, we have this layer of clear glass with all of the black stripes that are at an angle. Now this finished piece, it is going to be a bowl, and we have a shape of the contour on the white piece of paper right next to our melting furnace, and it's going to be this great big bowl shape. But when Mel cold works it, she's going to flatten a section off center. So when it sits, it's going to sit at an angle. And so I think that the angle that it sits at is going to follow the angle of the black stripes. So those black stripes will end up looking level, and the lip of the bowl will end up looking kind of tilted. All right, now Alex over there is working with one of our hoses that has compressed air coming from it. And so to help inflate this glass really efficiently, I think we're going to be using that compressed air hose. So you got to be careful when you go to do this, because if you overinflate the glass, you could make it get thin and unstable. Oh, no, we're just cooling off George's hands at the moment. Now, the thicker the piece of glass, the longer it takes to anneal. So we've got a great example of an enormous piece of glass in our innovations gallery. We have the Mount Palomar telescope lens. Well, we actually have the first draft of the Mount Palomar telescope lens. So this is a telescope lens that's many feet in diameter and a few feet thick, so an absolutely enormous piece of glass. It was cast, so it was poured into a mold out of a furnace. And that piece of glass is so big and so thick that it needed 11 months to cool down. Again, you want the surface, the outside layer of the glass to cool at the same rate as the very center, the very meaty part of that glass. Now, the first time that they cooled it down, it cracked. And so that's why we have the example up here in our innovations gallery. So they had to do it over. And I don't think that they had to cool it down longer the second time, but they just made adjustments in the annealing cycle. So the rate and the stages at which the temperature dropped and held was adjusted. All right, now we're making a mark, a little target on the very tip of the bubble. So Corey's got that task. He picked up a scrap of glass off the ground. I think it's actually the lip that they trimmed earlier from the cup. And with cold glass, you can score or scratch hot glass. And so made a little target, a little center point, because now we're going to stick this puntee on. And we want to stick that right on center. Nicely done, bullseye. And you can ooh and ah and clap for that as well. Not an easy thing to do from outside the bench. So if at that moment in time, if Nancy had sneezed and missed the target, if they had stuck it too high, too low, too far to the left or right, then the blowpipe and the puntee wouldn't turn together. You know, right now, it almost looks like a perfect axle, the way it, they could be one continuous piece of metal. That's what we want to see. We want them to turn in unison because that's going to keep radial symmetry. If they miss the target, then it would be wonky glass. We'd have a situation where it'd be very difficult to end up with a nice finished symmetrical piece. All right, now, while we're waiting for this puntee to reach just the perfect amount of stability where it can support the weight of this enormous object, we are going to be carefully managing the temperature at that constriction line. So they're torching the top of the bubble. We're waiting for the puntee connection to cool, and then we're going to thermally shock that tight constriction line. So part of the process always makes my heart pitter-patter. So a little drip of water right on that connection point. That's going to make that the coldest spot. And so we're going to put this up on the rail, tap the metal. Perfect break. Beautiful. Nicely done. And so quickly we get that up on the yoke, and we want to reintroduce it to the heat from the reheating furnace here. Nicely done. All right, and so Dane's saying he wants to let that puntee set. We can still really see the glass weeble wobbling at this stage. It's still going to take a moment for that puntee to really to settle down and become quite rigid. And so it still takes a tremendous amount of strength right now to keep it on center. All right, and so we're just going to make sure that we're happy with how much it's moving. And so we've got a really beautiful form right here. This could be a beautiful vase all on its own, but we know that Mel Douglas, our artist, has a different design in mind. She's done this drawing of the bowl that she wants to create. So we're going to see quite a bit of stretching happen here to open up the mouth of this bowl or the lip of this bowl. Now we're going to want the hottest section to be this lip, so heating it with the torch is going to help us get there. So with all of our pipes and punties, you might notice that, for instance, after we broke the piece of glass off of that blowpipe, there's all of that glass left behind on the end of it. Well, I think in this situation, we're seeing Corey save that up. He's going to make something else out of it. So that's going to get recycled or upcycled into something different. But typically, we consider that scrap glass. And people wonder, how do you get that glass off of your tool? Well, right here next to the melting furnace, we've got this big black bucket. And you see we have all the handles sticking out of that bucket? Well, as the glass cools down, it's shrinking, and that glass has a different coefficient of expansion than the steel. So what that means is that as the glass cools and shrinks, it's doing that at a different rate than the steel. So the glass is cooling and shrinking, the steel's not moving, and the glass explodes off the end of the metal. So we call that the blow-off bucket. You sometimes hear exploding glass or cracking glass from inside that bin, and it's just the tools or physics cleaning itself for us. So we can sometimes help that along. Oh, nice trim there. Yeah, beautiful trim of the lip. Nicely done. And that is just perfectly level. And to think about an object with that kind of scale, the heat that is radiating away, to be able to come in at such an awkward angle up underneath the piece of glass to trim and have that be level, they made it look way too easy. So if you go in and take a first glass blowing class, we're kind of setting you up for disappointment. What do you need, George? Oh, I think George wanted to see a different camera angle. So as George is reheating the glass, he has a pretty terrible view of the top of the piece, right? He can't see around the bottom. And so as he was reheating, he was actually taking a look in our big TV monitor so that he could see the very top or the front of the piece. Now that's not normal. There's not many studios where you can do that. All right, so we're getting bigger and bigger. We're getting closer to the shape that our artist, Mel Douglas, has designed. So if you look at the illustration of the bowl, it doesn't come up to an obtuse angle. It doesn't even come up to cylindrical walls. It stays slightly closed at the top. So it's not going to be too many more stretches from this point. As the glass comes down in temperature, those stripes are becoming more and more visible. You can see that beautiful cross-hatching pattern. But this piece is still going to look dramatically different when it's completely finished. She is going to spend 12 hours hand sanding this piece of glass. After she hand sands it, she's going to spend 70 or 80 hours etching and engraving the surface, creating beautiful lines. She says she looks at the form itself. She really relates that act of engraving lines into the glass to drawing on the glass. So it's certainly our hope that when this piece is completely finished after it's cold worked, that we will get to share pictures of it on our website. But it could be a little while from now. And this week, Mel is teaching at the studio at the museum. It's right across our parking lot. We can teach 3 to 5 classes at a time, up to 9 students per class, and we have that going on year-round. We have lots of classes taught in the summertime, but then they've recently issued the classes that you can register for the winter session. So if you are interested in taking a glass class, check out cmog.org and the class offerings at the studio. So we have instructors come from all over the planet. We have students come from all over the planet. And Corning is a really fun place to be for that reason. You get to meet glassblowers from all over and see collaborations like this one come together, where our artist is from Canberra, our gaffers range from Seattle, Penland, Corning, Cincinnati. Now, I saw a little bit of a wiggle in that bowl. Did you guys see how it kind of started to drape? And the fact that you don't see a lot of wiggle just speaks to the skill of your team right now. This is a beast to wrangle. This is, the hotter this glass becomes and the thinner this glass becomes, the more it wants to move and flow and drape and fold like fabric. And so the rate that they are turning is so, so important. The amount of heat is so, so important. Now, when we're done tonight, we are going to load it into one of our annealing ovens. So all these big black cabinets lining the sides of our stage are all annealing ovens that we can use to slow cool the glass. And so the temperature that this type of glass gets loaded into the annealer is 905 degrees Fahrenheit. So at that temperature, it's not going to melt or move or change shape, but it's stable enough that it's not going to crack. Now, this is a section of glass that was designed to fail, right? We do want that to crack eventually, but not too soon. If it cracks too soon, this whole piece could just fall on the floor before we're ready. So hopefully that little bit of torching will do the trick. Hopefully this nice long reheat inside the furnace is also going to make sure that they maintain enough temperature back there. But this shape is kind of working against us, just that big round flat bottom of the bowl. Doesn't quite get introduced to the burners of the furnace the same way that the top half does. And so while you're being careful not to overheat the top, the bottom stays maybe a little bit chillier than would be ideal. So little torch love on the punty here. It's like a nice warm hug, a little insurance policy. And that good photo op with the flames. So this torch that he's using, it's fired with propane. We've got another torch that has natural gas and oxygen. Our reheating furnace, which is about 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit, is also natural gas and forced air. The biggest change in technology in glass blowing over the last few thousand years is how we heat the glass. That instead of having to use wood and bellows to get the glass up to temperature, we're very happy that we can use these gas-fired furnaces. But other than that, not a lot of the technology has changed. We got a little bit of a wrinkle, a little bit of a fold. It's a little bit soft, but that's just the heat. And so very important that he turned so slowly so that it didn't flare out and get too big, but you could see what happens, just the heat in the material, the softness of the material. It really, really does want to fold like fabric. It's getting exciting. Beautiful heat, beautiful shaping, and a really awesome display of teamwork. So just looking for that perfect contour. And I think, this is how we know that we are really watching a truly great craftsman when we see this attention to detail being paid, this level of perfectionism and precision as Nancy's looking for that perfect contour and curve of the bowl. This is what sets her apart. This is, why her work is so renowned and so beautiful. So it's a pretty common phenomenon. If you look at a lot of glass that's handmade, you might look at it and see it sitting on a shelf and think that is just perfect. But if you were to put it on a turntable and start rotating it, it's remarkable how many things might have a little bit of a wobble or a wrinkle or a little bit of asymmetry to them. But of course, when we are looking at something being blown, we are seeing it constantly in rotation, and so any of those. So I'm curious to see if this is a project that she works on while she's here in Corning, New York, or if this is a piece of glass that gets shipped back to Australia and cold worked there. All right, now, a little bit of that radial symmetry was lost during those reheats. It wasn't quite as round, but here we are just pushing it back into shape. Nancy Callan is using cork paddles to do that. Cork is a really lovely shaping tool for the glass. It's soft and burns away, so it doesn't leave marks behind on the glass. It's not a great heat sink, so it won't chill the glass drastically. If you used a different type of material that was a greater heat sink, it could make the glass fracture. But cork is a really lovely shaping tool, and looks like she was able to just round that out perfectly. Nice form. All right, so I think we're about ready. Now, when we go to free this glass from the punty, once again, it's going to be a precarious transition. It's going to be an exciting moment in the life of the bowl because we do need to crack the glass and we do need to do it with a lot of precision. So a little bit of water right at this connection point. See how they angle the iron so that any dripping water won't fall back and touch the bottom of the bowl. Little vibration. Perfect break. Absolutely stunning. Into the oven it goes. Beautiful. We will see that again tomorrow. Let's have a huge round of applause for our artist, Mel Douglas, for our entire team of gaffers here. We've got Nancy Callan. We have Alex, Corey, Dane, Eric, George. Everyone has worked so hard tonight. And that was a beautiful piece of glass come together.